Welcome to today's question and answer session. Today's question comes from Pam on Noster, and she writes, "Are spray guns a game changer when it comes to painting? I might be itching for an excuse to buy it, but also keeping a close eye on budget, and a good old roller might do the trick. Can spray guns be used to paint home doors and walls as well?" That's a good question, and thank you for submitting it. Spray guns are great, but it depends on what kind of spray gun it is and what you're using it for. There's several different kinds of spray guns out there used for painting. There are HVLP guns, and that's like what they spray cars with. And then there's airless. Airless don't use a compressor to hook up to them, which HVLP requires a very large compressor. So that's one drawback to them. Excellent finish, but requires a compressor. Airless does not require a compressor, and they're fairly inexpensive now. And they do a pretty good finish. And you just got to be a little careful. You mask everything off, practice a little bit, and you can get a pretty good finish out of them. And then there's some other ones, like I think Wagner has one that is like a little bitty cup gun, doesn't require a compressor. And then there's like little turbine ones. I've never used those. I've basically used the HVLP gun and then the airless. I have both, and both are good. You got to be careful when you're using a spray gun because there's overspray everywhere. So you spend a lot of time masking stuff off that you wouldn't mask off if you were just roller painting. Now they're good, and they have their pluses and minuses and all that. And you can pick I would probably suggest for a beginner a small airless gun. They do require clean out. You got to clean them out and all that after every use, or you'll destroy it. So it'll clog up forever. I don't think it's quite a necessity. It's a nice to have. Rollers are good for painting. Really, what comes to mind, if you're wanting a good finish for painting, I don't know if you're using a water-based latex paint or an oil-based paint. You're going to get a far better finish out of an oil-based or an alkyd-based paint. It'll also lay down better, your brush marks will flow out, and you can get a really good finish just from a good brush and roller out of oil-based than you would a latex water-based. So that's kind of my first thought on your issue. Spray guns are fine, but concentrate a little bit on the type of paint. I think you'll be a little bit better off if you go with an oil-based finish, and be sure to prime the wood substrate before you prime and sand the wood substrate before you put down your final oil coat, and you'll get a really good finish. And you might not need the spray gun for it. Now, they can be used to paint the doors of a home. They're excellent for that. Your airless is perfect for that. That's kind of what they're made for. They're made for home painting. They are not good for walls. Airlesses are not good for walls because when you go and spray, the spray pattern is like a fan, but the edges of the fan are thicker. So it's spraying out more paint on the edges. So what happens is when you go up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down on your walls, when it dries, you'll see spray marks. That can be solved if you spray and roll after it, roll it out after you spray it while still wet. But then that, you're kind of actually adding an extra step because you could just roll it. So when I paint a house, I will spray all the woodwork oil with an oil base, all the doors, and then come in with brush and roller and cut in all the walls. Masking tape off all the trim and all that. Caulk in between the trim and the wall, and it turns out real nice. So rolling the walls, there's some professional crews that'll spray it, but most of them will just roll out your walls. Question number 2, if I were to get a woodcutter, are there anything less scary than a table saw? I might have watched too many Quentin Tarantino movies. This scares the crap out of me. Well, that's a funny question. It should, first off, because it's a nasty little blade spinning around pretty fast. And I have partially cut one of my fingers with it. So they're no joke, and you got to be careful. I don't know if there's anything, there's things that are less scary. You can get a handsaw, and that's less scary. It depends on what you're cutting too. If you're needing long cuts, long straight cuts, then you're going to need a table saw, or you're going to need a skill saw, a handsaw. And a handsaw, I don't think, is less scary than a table saw. In fact, in some ways it's scarier, because at least a table saw, the blade is in the middle of a table. So you most people, and including myself, that have been hurt on table saws, it's when they get too complacent, or if it gets to the end of the day, or something a little too repetitive, that's when they get hurt. Like my instance, I was in a hurry and I was doing a cut, like your fence is here, the blade was going towards the fence. I was, cutting a miter on a long piece of board. So I was creating a pinch point to where that wood would kick back eventually. And what I did is I was pushing it through, and then I would kind of walk around it and pull it through. And that's when it grabbed and threw my right hand through the blade. Totally my fault. There's nothing I could blame it on. It was my fault. I set up a poor setup. I created a pinch point with the blade. If the blade was the other way, then that wood couldn't get pinched. It would just kind of ride up onto the blade. And I could have used some feather boards and stuff like that. So it's good to have a healthy fear. I have a healthy fear of the table saw. It just depends on what you're cutting. If you want long straight cuts, then you got to have a table saw or a skill saw. If you want twisty cuts, then a bandsaw or a scroll saw. And a scroll saw is not that scary. You can get cut on them, but they're not that scary. Bandsaws, they're dangerous, but they're not. You've got to kind of work to get hurt on them. If you're not watching what you're doing, you can get cut on any table or any saw. So, but I think from what I'm getting from your questions, you want straight long cuts, and that would be either a table saw or a circular saw. And if you have the money, a table saw and even a benchtop table saw is fine. And those can be relatively inexpensive. Just watch watch some good safety videos on them. Don't get complacent. Watch what you're doing. Use push sticks. Like this. This will save, many a lifetime of fingers. And just don't get complacent. That would be my advice. You will get used to it, but you'll never, like me, I've had my table saw for 20 years, and I still have a healthy respect for it. It ain't my friend. It's there to take my fingers off when I'm not paying attention. So, but that's what I would suggest. Moving on to question 3. Based on your experience, do you have a personal preference between plywood, MDF, block boards, and why? I prefer ply or layers of blocks over chipboards, MDF. But a lot of furniture makers seem to love MDF. My preference is a plywood, which is, layers of wood, many different layers of wood sandwiched together. That's my preference. I've never used, you're calling it blocks. I think that's probably lumber core is what it's called in the States. I think I may have used it once or twice. It would be fine. Lumber core is fine. MDF, I know a lot of people like it. I like it for certain things. I don't like it nailing or fastening. It kind of only takes to a glued joint, because MDF is great if you go from front to back, through the front and that, but if you go through the side, it'll split the layers. It can be split real easy. That's why I don't like it, because you got to be kind of careful of that. Plus, finishing it, MDF is very thirsty, and so you got to prime those edges. If you're painting it, you got to prime those edges to keep it from soaking in your paint. It's not my most favorite. Sometimes that's the only way you can get the wood that you want. If it's some sort of oak veneer, you can only get it over MDF. That's fine. MDF is great. It's heavy. That's another reason I don't like it. It's very flat and stable unless it gets wet. When it gets wet, it will soak up and swell up and eventually just fall apart. So it's not exactly my most favorite, and I would rather not use it. I would rather use just a regular plywood, or the lumber core would be great too. So appreciate your questions, and if anybody else has questions, you can drop them down in the comments below, and keep on building.